as well as our CVs. We're your hosts, Sousa and Emilie Hackett, and today we're interviewing Principal Goldbloom. Pleasure to have you on our podcast today.
Very pleased to be here.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Experiential Learning Internship Grant Fund, the Bishop's Bookstore, and the Advancement Office for making this podcast series possible.
We would also first like to acknowledge that the territory on which we hold BUtalks is the traditional and unceded territory of the Abenaki First Nations and the Wabanaki Confederacy. In performing land acknowledgement, we make what was once invisible visible and invite the land, the First Nations people, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission into our conversation today. So, Principal Goldbloom, welcome. We're going to start off with an easy question off the bat. What's the best part about being the principal here at Bishop's University?
Oh, there's so many aspects to it. You know, I feel very fortunate in terms of the career I've had. I loved being a newspaper publisher. I wasn't sure I would ever have a job that I would enjoy as much. And Bishop's, my almost 10 years now, has given me just enormous satisfaction and an opportunity to grow and to learn. So I guess if I were to be specific to try and answer your question, I think the greatest joy comes from being involved with young people who are at a really interesting stage of their lives. And to see, I mean, you may not, I don't know if you recognize it amongst for yourselves or your friends, but people who arrive on our campus at 18 years of age, there's a huge development that happens between 18 and 22. So to see some not so confident always and not so certain people arrive at Bishop's at 18, and to see how much this education transforms them, supports them, prepares them to go out into the world, it's enormously satisfying. And the remarkable thing from my perspective about this job is that it begins again every year. There's a new group of students who arrive. So there's a constant energy that comes with that. So the job never gets boring because it's always renewing itself every year. And I do feel that by the nature of our campus, each generation of students defines the university for themselves. So there are many things that remain constant probably over our 175 years. But the university does change a little bit each year with each new generation of students who come onto the campus and who shape what it is and what it will be. So all of that is just gives me an enormous amount of motivation and pleasure in having this responsibility.
And speaking of student development, the new library is being open next fall. How excited are you about that, and what do you think that new facility can provide students and the community as well?
Well, very excited about it. As you know, we renovated and expanded our sports center a couple of years ago. And for me, even physically where they are, the sports center on the east side of the campus and the library on the west side of the campus, they really do represent, such key components of our university. Many of our students gather and use our sports center, and of course the library remains the intellectual heart of our university. And as we began to think about this project, there were some people who are saying, well, why would you invest in a library? I mean, like, people aren't going to be reading books anymore. The last thing you need is a physical space. But the reality is, and you can attest to this, is that I think the library is and will continue to play as important a role as it ever has in the life of the institution. What is a library? It's a place where one goes to get information, and whether that information's on ink on paper or electronically, you still need to have access, and there are some things that are only going to be possible through the library. You need professionals who can help guide students in terms of getting access to information. And I think, your generation has an extraordinarily complex challenge about trying to differentiate between what is, well, I guess to use Donald Trump's phrase, what's fake news and what's real, right? And you have access to so much, but it's not all valid and reliable. So learning those skills, I think the library will, and Learning Commons will continue to play a critical role for that. I find it very interesting in this regard. You know, it's unfortunately a fair number of years since I was in university, but you know, I always went to study in the library. I just didn't have the discipline to study in my room, right? So I had to get out of my and I don't think that's changed a lot, right? And I see that we keep the library open till like 2 o'clock in the morning for exams, right? So I think that hasn't changed. I think what has changed is the way that students learn, and I think it's clear that there's much more. It's much more of a collaborative process than it was for previous generations. So in conceiving this learning commons, we've tried to create spaces where students will be able to come together in small groups and work together and learn together and educate each other. So I'm very excited about this. I think the bringing together a number of the services that we have for students, the writing center and other services like that, all together in the same building, I also think is going to add an additional energy and dynamism. So I'm really, these things take time, right? It was back, it's got to be, well, it was 6 years ago, I think, that the students held their referendum where they decided to contribute to the renovation of the library, which for me was just an extraordinary important moment in the life of our university, that our students decided that they wanted to contribute financially for something that they wouldn't benefit from, right? So really the notion of paying it forward. So anyway, all of which is to say it's a long time from coming up with the idea to actually seeing it reach fruition. And so next September, we're going to be opening this new library and learning commons. And I think it's going to be a great moment for the university, for which our community will benefit for a very long time.
And staying on the topic of students, with all the projects that Bishop's undertaken over the past few years, like the geothermal project, the carbon certified campus, and the bottled water free campaign, why do you think it's important that the schools stay proactive instead of reactive?
Well, first, I think that's a role of a university, to be a place that develops new ideas and implements them. So I think even those things are part of the learning process for our students, to be always thinking about how we can make the world a better place. So I think it is our responsibility as educators to be helping our students, equipping them to be innovators. So I think if that's what we're trying to do, then it's important that we innovate here as well. And so I think we have a responsibility to lead, not just for within the university setting, but within the society at large. And one of the things that gives me so much confidence about the future is the degree to which Bishop students have been engaged in trying to determine ways to improve the university, to help the community around us, and to contribute to making, I know it's a bit maudlin to say, but to contributing to making a better world. So I think it's really important that we not be simply reactive, but that we be initiators.
That's really important. So we've also been wondering, as the principal, obviously you're not the one in class teaching, but what is it that you hope that the students will acquire as skills and values at Bishop's?
Yes. Well, I think that the most important skill sets for our students to acquire are, one, an ability to communicate effectively, both writing and orally, and using whatever means of communications, including podcasts. So I think that maybe take a step back. My strong conviction is that any university that focuses exclusively on trying to prepare students for jobs that currently exist is really going down the wrong path. Because everything that we've seen is that the rate of change in society means that many of the jobs that you are all going to do in your lives don't exist today. So if we're preparing you only for what exists, we're not preparing you well. So what we need to do is to give you the skills so that you can help make the change but also adapt to the change. So that's why I start with communication skills. I think the ability to clearly communicate your ideas is critical to being to a successful career in virtually any domain. A second thing is the ability to work with others. I mean, from my experience, from my career and what I've observed, almost nobody works on their own. Even the solitary writer has to work with an editor and a publisher, and so learning to work effectively with other people is a critical skill, and I think it's one of the great advantages of bishops, but that's just part of our culture. And if I were to generalize about bishops' students when they graduate, we have great students, we have great professors, but other universities have great students and great professors. I think what distinguishes our students is one, a social intelligence, which is exceptional. And I think that comes from living in a residential community with as diverse a population as we have. And as you know, about half of our students are from Quebec. Half of them are Francophone. About 35% of our students come from across Canada. And another 10 or 15% from about 40, 50 different countries. So it means that our students here have grown up, have had an experience for 3 or 4, sometimes 5 years of living in a learning community that has significant, at least geographic diversity and people from very different backgrounds. So I think that's a second really critical skill, the ability to communicate, the ability to work with people who are different than yourself, the ability to work in teams, and then I think the ability to think critically. And I think that most significant innovation is going to come from people who take an idea from one discipline, an idea from another discipline, and kind of mash them together and produce something new. I think the great thing about a liberal education that we have is that we encourage our students to expose themselves to different disciplines. One of the things I love is convocation. Students coming across the stage, and we say this person majored in business and did a minor in chemistry, or majored in philosophy and did a minor in drama. There's so many, and I think that the fact that that's part of our culture, and the fact that we are not so large that our students hang together only with those people studying the same discipline, which is what happens in big universities. It even happens with faculty. In larger universities, all of your physics professors are alone together, and your law professors are alone together, but at Bishops, where there's a interdisciplinarity which is in our DNA. So I think our students graduate with that. So I think that's another really important skill set that Bishop students have more than the average student at other larger universities. The last thing I would say is, and this is was counterintuitive for me. When I first got here, I was meeting some of our graduates, and they were telling me that they felt better prepared for grad school than some of the students they had met from the larger institutions. And I thought, well, how can that be? We're an undergraduate institution. They've gone to these large research-intensive universities. Surely they would be better prepared. And in fact, it's the opposite, because Bishop students, as undergraduates, have more of an opportunity to work with professors on research projects, because our professors, when they have their projects, they don't have grad students that they can turn to. So they naturally turn to the students that they have. And I think that means that in many ways our students are better prepared for going on to graduate school than students from larger universities may be.
Well, being part from such a small community, we have the blessing to have professors that know our names. We're not just a number. Our biggest class is 150 students, and that in bigger schools is the average size of classes, turning on the smaller size. So having these professors that know us really helps us engage in the classroom. But is there a way in which we engage back with our professors? Most of these podcast series have been focused on the transformative learning environment for students, but in what way can that environment affect the growth and transformation of our professors here?
Good question, and I think that happens. If you certainly in my discussions with our professors, I think because they believe one that learning is a lifelong thing, that it's not as though that they are of the view that they have all the knowledge that they require and it's simply a question of transmitting it. The classes that I've sat in on have been very interactive discussions, and so I think our professors are learning from their students all the time. One of the things that I don't have a lot of experience in being in a classroom teaching. I have some, and you quickly learn that all the things you don't know that you thought you knew about a subject, when you step into a classroom and have to try and convey that knowledge to other people. So I think yes, we all focus. You're right. We focus on the small classes and the benefit to our students, but let me go down a side alley here for a moment. As you know, we have a speaker series, the Donald Lecture Series, right? And a couple of years ago, we invited Jesse Jackson, right, the famous Afro-American preacher and verging on politician in the United States. So he was coming to speak. He landed in Montreal. He'd flown from Chicago, and he's being driven to Bishops. And after about 40 minutes, he turns to the driver and says, Montreal's a lot bigger than I thought it was. So he hadn't understood that Bishops was not in Montreal. So when he got up to speak that night, he said, I guess no one comes to Bishops by mistake. And we pretty quickly adopted that as almost a bit of a slogan about the university. And I think it applies, I know this seems like I'm going off on a tangent, but I think it applies to our professors. No one comes to be a professor at Bishops if they aren't really interested and engaged with teaching. If they don't really get pleasure and see value of being able to interact in a very direct way with students, right? If they were content to be in the front of a classroom with 300 or 400 students and having teaching assistants grading their papers, then this would not be a good place for them, right? So I think our faculty, there is a self-selection that happens with the students who choose to come here. I always say one of the great advantages for Bishops is, again, students don't come here by mistake. If you're looking for a large urban university, right, with large classes where you can be anonymous, you better not choose to come to Bishops, right? And I think it's true for our professors as well. So I think they do feel that this is an opportunity to continue to grow and learn through the exchanges that they have with their students.
And just to touch on the process, the learning process specifically, like over your time here, you've seen a number of students go through their 4 years here and go on to be successful in numerous careers. As a principal, looking at the alumni, who's been the most inspirational or most change-making that come to mind?
We have 17,000, 18,000 alumni. It's hard to single any particular person out. I mean, one of the wonderful things about Bishops is that virtually every sector of society, every profession, there are Bishops graduates who have gone on in politics, in medicine, in the arts. All right, so I have to choose one. Well, let me choose the first one that I met. So when I was being approached about becoming the principal of Bishops, our chancellor at the time was Scott Griffin, a graduated from Bishop's, I think, in 1960s. Very successful businessman, but an adventurer. So Scott once flew a single-engine plane across the North Atlantic and spent a year in Africa working with the Flying Doctor Service in Africa. What I love about Scott is that there's the business aspect of his life, but there is an extraordinarily creative part of it. He's created a poetry prize for students across Canada. And he has a program where students stand up in English or in French and recite poetry all across the country. There are literally thousands of students now involved in this. So, as an inspiration to me about how special this place could be, and Scott would say that the education he had here, the intimate learning relationship he had with the professors here. It was a smaller place in 1960 than it is today, but it's interesting that, the way that I think generally our current students would speak about the university is the same way that Scott did and does. So, I was a little bit skeptical about Bishop's when I first came here because people the students, and just loved it so much. I almost felt like it was a little bit like a cult, and I was trying to understand. It took me some time to really understand the true value of the model of education that we have here. So for me, Scott Griffin was the first person who kind of embodied it, who helped transmit it to me, and seeing the leadership that he's shown and his commitment to our institution. He and his family have been extraordinarily generous to Bishop's. Griffin House, we've named after the Griffin family because of not just their financial contribution, but it's their deep, deep belief in this model of education and the importance of what we're doing. So if I had to choose one, and I mean no offense to all our other graduates, but that's the one person I would single out.
So we're just wondering, what makes Bishop's unique? We know that we've spoken about many things about the Bishop's environment with the professors, and you've mentioned orientation week, and how at Bishop's we mingle with people that aren't necessarily just in our program, and that's one of the things of orientation week. We're not singled out with people that we study with. It's completely at random, and that's been a really great experience for, I think, most of us, because we've met people that we won't necessarily meet around campus because we don't go to the same classes. So from this small community effect and just the variety of people, is there anything in particular that makes us unique?
Well, I have to say, first and foremost, I think it's our model of education. As I said before, I think we attract outstanding professors and outstanding students. And there is a self-selection process that happens. So we tend to attract students, for example, who are interested in being engaged in a community. As I said before, if you want to be anonymous, this is not the place you're going to come. So I think it's the model of education first and foremost, and that's part of the reason why we created this association with the 3 other universities in Canada that resemble us. That's why we created the Maple League, because we're not the norm in Canada. The norm in Canada is the large urban university with very large classes. It's less than 10% of students in Canada who leave their home province to go to university. I don't know what the percentage is that goes to a small residential undergraduate university. It's got to be, maybe 2% of the population. So already, between ourselves, Acadia, Mount Allison, St. FX, we have a unique model of education for Canada. It's a model, interestingly, which is very present in the United States, and some of the most respected universities in the United States look like Bishop's. Amherst, Williams, Middlebury, Bates, Bowdoin, Wellesley. Just the small residential liberal university is highly regarded in the United States. The difference is that all those schools I just mentioned, they're all private institutions, and people are paying $50,000, $60,000 a year to go there. So, when we talk about the miracle on the Massawippi, it's in part trying to maintain a university like ours in a public system is very, very difficult, because the funding, Canada's universities are funded basically, your source of revenue is the number of students that you have. So the reason that universities in the rest of the country have grown so large, in my view, is because that's how you bring in more revenue. But that's not our model. So I think that's fundamentally what makes us unique. The fact that we have a significant linguistic balance between English and French, and that we have a cégep on our campus with a lot of francophone students, I think that is unique in Canada. So those are some of the factors. And then, look, I'd like to think that because Bishops has been a very united university during my time here. We haven't had much conflict, even though we have been going through arguably one of the greatest financial challenges in the history of the institution. When organizations get in trouble or in financial difficulty, there are kind of two paths you can go down. Everyone can kind of start taking shots at each other, right? Faculty can be blaming staff, and staff can be blaming faculty, and everyone can be blaming the administration, and you can have a lot of division. Or what you can have is everybody pulling together for the best interests of the institution. And I think that is pretty rare, what we've experienced at Bishops over the decade that I've been here. So although, as I say, I was seriously concerned about how we were going to find a way to be able to keep going financially. The fact that our students chose to contribute to the renovation of the library, the fact that our faculty and staff were prepared to be very modest in terms of their expectations in terms of remuneration as we were working through this, the fact that we had to reduce some of our contract faculty, and that meant in some instances fewer courses for our students, and our students understood that we had to get through that. I think if it's not unique, it's very, very rare, and that speaks to the extraordinary, the culture of our institution, and the fact that from one generation to the next, there is a sense which is transmitted from each generation of students to the next of a sense of responsibility for the institution. I think a lot of students at Canadian universities see themselves as kind of consumers, but they don't see themselves as having a deep engagement and responsibility to ensure the long-term viability of their institution. And the fact that we've had that at Bishops over my time here is probably the thing that I'm most proud of, that this community has been united in wanting to find ways to make sure that we, one, continued, and two, that we provided the best possible undergraduate education to our students. And the fact that our students are saying, to surveys that they are the most satisfied students in Canada is an enormous credit to our faculty, to our staff, and to our students. So those are the things I think that make us unique and that I'm most proud of. As the principal of the university, I very much have a sense that I have been entrusted with the leadership of the institution for a period of time. We've been around for 174 years, soon 175, and I think that we all have to continue to have a long-term perspective on the institution. So some of the things that I've been most pleased about is, one, yes, we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get to ourselves to a situation of financial sustainability. We've made significant progress on that. We've been very concerned about the environmental sustainability of the institution. You know that we've introduced a number of projects in that regard. I've been pleased that we've been able to invest in our infrastructure. The reality is that Bishop's had its most significant period of growth in terms of its buildings in the 1960s. So we built a lot in the 1960s, but because of the financial challenges of the institution, we didn't really do anything to preserve our buildings. And 50, 60 years later, many of them were not in very good shape. So we have been going about in a pretty deliberate way, renovating our residences, renovating our science building, renovating the sports center, renovating the library. So those are things that, for the next 20 or 30 years will be and longer, let's hope. And what we intend to do is not to make the mistake that the institution made or was forced to make in the 1960s. So now when we invest in a building, we're now putting money aside every year so that when it comes, that we're going to be able to keep them up to date so we don't face the type of crisis we've been facing. One of the things I'm most pleased about is that we developed a master plan for the campus. So before we decided to do any of the significant interventions that we've done, we developed a long-term master plan for the university. So that now when we have a question or an opportunity to do something, we can do it with in terms of a coherent plan. So the broad stroke idea, as you may be aware, is that we want to get cars off the center of the campus. We want to create a peripheral road so that all the parking is on the outside. So once you get into the heart of the campus, you won't have to be worried about cars. So it was only in developing that plan that's going to guide the university for the next several decades that I think will have a long-term impact on the institution. And not everyone thinks about our built environment. A lot of people, when they think about Bishop's, think about it being in such a beautiful natural setting. But the reality is the number of times I've spoken to students who have said, you know what, I arrived on the Bishop's campus and I knew within like 2 minutes that this is where I wanted to go. Why is that? It's because the architecture speaks of our values, right? You look at McGreer and the other buildings on the campus and the way that they're laid out, it communicates something. So for me, it was really important that we have a master plan so that future generations of the leaders of Bishop's will be able to ensure that the campus develops in a way which is thoughtful, respectful of the environment, and more focused on the individual than on the car. So that's, and then I guess the last thing I would say is we have managed to attract an outstanding generation of young faculty. So for me, in terms of a long-term sense of what I hope to help accomplish here, to see a new generation of young, dynamic, really creative faculty who want to advance knowledge and who are interested in finding new ways to impart information to students and to continue on a journey with their students in their process of learning. That's, in the end, what we are first and foremost. The university is really, it's just its people. So that we've been able to attract increasing numbers of students and outstanding students and so many young and interesting and dynamic young faculty. I think those are the things that I'm most proud of in terms of my tenure as the principal of Bishop's.
Well, we're definitely proud to have you as our principal, and thank you so much for being with us today. Well, that concludes our BUtalks interview of today with Dr. Goldbloom, and thank you again for being there with us.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.